Hello, this is the crew. This is the crowd.
Like a rap.
The gang.
Welcome, everybody. This is the GNOME State of GNOME, which is another take on what used to be the state of the shell. As Jonathan Blandford, an old friend of ours, used to say, it's kind of an acquired taste, but once your palates get used to it, you're going to discover a range of flavors of GNOME that I'm sure you'll enjoy. So let's begin with Marco. And I need to pass you the microphone.
So we do the introduction, which one, right? Okay, so let's work. This.
Go.
So hello, I'm Marco, who am in the desktop team at Ubuntu, also a GNOME developer. I work on some stuff. And recently I got into low level of GNOME, going to the deep of the problems and the pleasure of it. And so as Canonical now, we are helping to maintain GLib. And so let's go for some updates. GLib is the lowest level library that GNOME provides, for some C basic operations and to do everything you need in the desktop, basically. And there was a big change in our the regex engine as a regular expansion engine, which we're still depending on the old per-compatible regular expressions system, the version 1. Now we're finally moving to 2 after, I think, 7 years it was released, so we're on track. And then, yeah, we are very good at updating our new code because we just updated the day it was officially released, so we had new emojis and everything. And supporting for more size of thumbnails, with high DPI screens, and all this is done also at GNOME at GLib level, which is then talking to the REST components of the desktop in order to produce our thumbnails. Then Matthias here worked in amazing stuff in order to get lots of performances in order to create and destroy all the thousands of objects we are facing on the desktop every click we do, basically, every movement of the mouse and everything else. And so we're improving every single user experience. Then, there's some more level stuff on the GIO level. So GIO is basically the part of GLib which is doing the IO stuff, you can imagine. So like attribute removal and controlling them. Plus, we have some G application, G file improvements in order to fetch, basically to fetch asynchronously applications, default applications for a specific URL or type, and those things were all done, but not really in a fully async way now yet. As more something which is more like Ubuntu related and Snap related. Robert and Sergio here worked for improving the support on portals for snaps as well, and that requires some GIO updates, and we're doing that. It's not yet in the code base, so it's the last step of review, and we're there. Also, as upstream GLib, we're trying now to make it more testable than it used to be, and so in theory should be everything more stable and more reliable. And here we go, some nerd stuff. So we introduced a few more APIs. Some of them are really useful. Some maybe you don't think so, but we do. Especially you can look better in today documentation, which is auto-generated by GitLab on every main updates. So going from a low level to another low level, the lowest level, our shell is the JS engine, which is GJS. It's the GNOME JS tool, which basically translates all the requests we do via JS into C code and basically calls GLib, functions in order to perform any actions again. And we got actually during the latest cycles, we mostly did performance updates and with some maintenance, not really big changes, but I want to highlight the contribution we got from Sergio again, from the desktop team at Ubuntu, the support for native promises for calling the async methods, and then we also improved a bit the logging until that was actually a Google Summer of Code contribution, which improved the debugging and working with GJS. Plus, more improvements and fixes and improvements. But let's go with next stuff.
Yeah, hello. I'm Matthias. I work at Red Hat in the desktop team, and I've been working on GTK and Pango for quite a few years. So I'll give a little update on that. Pango is, if you don't know it, is the text rendering library that provides text rendering for both GTK and for GNOME Shell. So you've definitely seen the output of Pango on your screen. Unfortunately, even though that's a pretty central part of the desktop, I'm the only one working on it really, so not too much is happening there, only when I have time to do things. So as you can see, in the last year, there was mainly bug fix updates. It's still version 150, now up to 150.12. There's only a few things that I managed to sneak in over the past year. One is I've added a serialization format, so it's now hopefully a lot easier to report rendering issues, because you can really serialize the whole Pango layout and all the involved fonts and everything in a JavaScript, a JSON file, and then I can reproduce the bugs and hopefully debug them easier. That should help me. And another thing, earlier last winter, I spent a week with Bedard, who was also working on text rendering, and together we managed to add some basic baseline handling. And I wanted to have at least one screenshot here, so I'll explain a little bit what that's about. So normally text is rendered on a baseline here, like Latin text has the baseline at the bottom of the glyphs, as you probably know. But there's other scripts, like this is Tibetan, and I'll apologize to anybody who might speak Tibetan in the audience. I have no idea what this text means. I just picked that from an example file. But you can see Tibetan has a hanging baseline. That means like the text is basically aligned at the top and hangs below the baseline. And you can see that the different scripts kind of match up, like we adjust the rendering so that it all comes out on one line. And if you change the font size here in the Tibetan, you'll see that it actually matches up at the hanging baseline, which is not something that we could do before. So that's a nice little advantage. Moving on to GTK, a lot more has happened there, since it's not just me working on it. There was 2 major releases in the past year, 4.6 and 4.8. And I should briefly say GTK 3 is pretty stable now. Like if you're not interested in getting the latest cool developments, GTK 3 is a good place to be. It's just small bug fixes that we backport to GTK 3. GTK 4 is very active development, happens these days. And there's quite a few things that has happened. And one change over the past year, I would say, is that we actually have quite a few GTK 4 applications now, and not just like new toy applications that people wrote because they were excited about GTK 4, but also like core applications in the desktop, like Nautilus or the control center are now using GTK 4. So we're actually getting good use, and we're also getting bug reports. So we need to fix things. Like one major thing we fixed was scrolling optimization. So the new column view widget that we have actually performs well. For example, in Nautilus, if you have a file listing, you don't want that to stutter. So we spent quite a bit of time there. One thing that came out of that effort is a new label replacement, which is called GTK Inscription. It's a lot simpler than the label, so it hopefully performs better in situations where you have a ton of labels and you don't want complex text rendering, but just a simple string for each cell in a column view. Other things that happened over the past years that I think Marco did that, updated the emoji support to the latest Unicode standard, and we added more locale support there. And we stopped translating property names, which might sound like a minor thing, but for translators, it's actually pretty significant. That allowed us to drop almost 1,800 strings from our translations, which is more than half. So significant improvement for translators. And these strings really only showed up if you were using Glade. So it's not that important. It's not a loss for end users. Other things happened, like we made file drag and drop work For sandboxed apps like in Flatpaks, that works now. It goes via a portal. So yeah. Looking forward to the future. For the next cycle in Pango, once again, not too much is happening because it's really just me. But thankfully, a few other people care about Pango on other platforms. So what we'll get there is a port of our Windows support to direct write. So far, we've been using very old GDI APIs, and direct write is what you're nowadays using on Windows. So that should make the situation a bit better there. On the GTK side, for GTK 4.10, one exciting thing that you may have seen go by on Twitter is that the file chooser is actually getting a grid view. Yay. That's been 18 years in the making. But that's really just a side effect of us completing some work that we wanted to do for GTK4. Like we want to deprecate all our cell renderers and the tree view, like all the infrastructure that we have for tree views, where like we have a whole separate layout system. That was a goal for GTK4. We did not quite get to the finish line mainly because of the file chooser, which was still using tree views. That is getting ported over to the column view this cycle, and then it becomes very easy to add things like a grid. So watch out for announcements around that. There's some other new APIs that we're introducing, new file color and font picker APIs that are a little more high level and will allow us to deprecate GTK dialog and some of our existing chooser interfaces. That is more or less preparation for the next version, GTK5. We're starting to deprecate APIs that we want to get rid of in GTK5. There's no need to panic around that. Like, that's still quite a while out. We haven't even made a roadmap for when we want to do GTK5, but we're doing deprecations early so people have a chance to adapt to that. Right, last slide, I'm looking forward. I told you what's coming in the next cycle, but that's not all that's happening. Like, there's a lot of things that get developed in branches. And there's a whole Pango 2 branch that I worked on over the past 1.5 years or so, which modernizes Pango APIs and introduces things like making line breaking available as a first-class thing. We have this high-level Pango layout object, which really just gives you a paragraph of text. And it's a little hard to like do more complex line breaking things with Pango layout. So in Pango 2, I have a new object that makes that available more as a primitive operation. It'll also make it a lot easier to create synthetic fonts and be more flexible about fonts. Unfortunately, that is all stuck in a branch because Pango is like exposed as part of GTK API, so we cannot just switch from from Pango 1 to Pango 2 without also revving GTK to GTK5. So that's kind of tied together and is waiting for us to get our act together. Right. Going along with that, with the new Pango APIs, it's also maybe doing font rendering in a better way. There's a branch that uses Glyphy, like using shaders and sign distance fields to render fonts on the GPU. That's still a bit more experimental. We'll see if that pans out as we hope it will, but it might. And there's also a branch for introducing paths objects as a primitive in GTK, so you can do more complex rendering on the GPU. Also very experimental still. We don't really have worked out how to do that nicely. That's kind of like, if you know Skia, that's like the kind of API that we would hope to have there. And then there's people working on better color management support and HDR. That will hopefully land a lot sooner than some of the other things. I think we're hoping to introduce some of that work in the next cycle or two. And I mentioned the column view before. That's one of the big new widgets in GTK4, and we are adding more APIs to it as people discover what they want to do with it and what they can't do currently. One of the things that we are hoping to introduce is support for sections. If you think of like you have an alphabetic list of things, you want to like group them by letter, everything in A, everything in B, so that's the kind of section that we're thinking about there. We'll see when that happens. And I think with that, I pass it on to Georges.
I was tasked to talk about controversial topics, so here I am. Let's talk about settings in GNOME. Not settings, but the settings app. Fortunately, we have a GTK4 version of settings now. It was by far the largest GTK4 port that I have ever done in my life, and I have done various of them. This is, I think, the third or the fourth biggest code base in the entire platform. So GNOME doesn't hate settings. It is settings that take too much space in our code base. Looks pretty. We have dark mode, dark and light. Actually, this string was actually changed to default because it's not a binary state. It's a tri-state. It's dark mode, light mode, and whatever the app wants mode. And what is here in the screenshot shown as light is actually whatever the app wants. This was changed. But anyway, we have this now. We have dark and light wallpapers that switched together with the dark mode in the system. All GTK4 apps using libadwaita automatically get all this love, all this treatment of colors. I have a new device security panel. I think it was disabled in Ubuntu, the current release of Ubuntu. Hopefully it's going to be enabled in the future. Basically, firmware, secure boot, security reporting. You have access to this information now. You can see what's on and off on your computer. And as far as I'm aware, in the very near future, you will be able to turn on some of these things and improve the security of your device from this panel, which is fantastic. The security levels are kind of fun because it's like they kind of gamify the whole thing. So you got security level 1 and 2. Oh, you're 3, you're best. But like security level 3 is like hypothetical science fiction scenarios kind of threads. And security 2 is like, you want security 2 on your massive intercontinental company. And security 1 is like very good for a desktop user. So the bar is very high for getting these things. So getting a good security level actually means a lot. We got new user panel, thanks to Felipe. Was that you? Okay, I'm not wrong. New user design panel. Looks a little bit better, easier to use. Less non-standard widgetry. Well, I talked about the dark light selector. We have that now with the wallpapers. Hopefully we're going to get some scheduling of dark and light. Probably not in GNOME 44 because I'm not working on that, but if somebody wants to work on that, I'll be delighted to review the patches. We got remote connections with RDP. That's the default now. We use RDP instead of VNC, right? Yeah. Which is good because this is a little bit better, more secure, etc., etc. And woof. That's all I can say about it. We're done. Actually, let me tell you a little bit more about this. There was a certain person with a dog, and the dog was adopted, and somehow the dog barks sound theme was enabled on their computer, and this person's dog was suffering a lot. And I, for the life of me, I'm not going to allow any other dog to suffer in my watch because of a joke that happened like 15 years ago. It's gone. You can still grab the file and set your computer to bark for you if you want. Nobody's going to judge. But it's kind of embarrassing to have this as the default, as one of the default themes on a pretty big desktop environment.
So it meows now.
Well, that's a very good discussion we were having with Heather a few moments ago. Like setting aside all the ethics of having barks but not meows or even bird sounds. This is a very good idea for an application developer to come up with, because I'm pretty sure that kids are going to love the GNOME Zoo. The naming also came from Heather, by the way. If somebody wants to create their first app and publish somewhere, here's a great idea. Write a zoo app where you can set sounds of elephants and cats and dogs and birds and iguanas and whatever you want on your desktop. And these are the controversial topics. Thanks for listening to me. Now for you both.
Yeah. I start.
There you go.
Yeah. So let's continue with Mutter. For you who don't know what Mutter is, it's the library that is the backing bone of the shell, who does hardware abstraction, compositing. It's pretty much the back end of the shell, so to say. Let's first do a recap of what we have done the last cycle or two. We made it possible to do hardware-accelerated screencasting via Pipewire. It has been something that has not really been possible in the X11 days, but thanks to the transition to Wayland and using Pipewire for screencasting, that suddenly became a possibility. So for the applications that can do that, they can have super fast screencasting and screen sharing. Continuing with hardware enablement, certain laptops, if you enable something called privacy screen, if you look at them from the side, you can't really see the content of the screen. Marco added support to enable that via both in settings and in the compositor. So when you toggle the setting, you can't see the content of the screen if you're not straight in front of it. We've also done something that was also hard on X11, which was to do automatic bypass of the compositor, which means that you take, for example, game content and push it directly to the screen without doing any compositing as a performance improvement. In X11, the games had to play a role in it, saying that I want to, and it had some side effects like tearing and things like that, and a bit glitchy when you switch back and forth. But also, thanks to the transition to Wayland, we could just do it automatically whenever there was any full screen hardware accelerated or X11 application showing on the screen. Another thing that we did the last half year was starting to move towards color managed compositor. In the past, GNOME as a platform was kind of color managed in the old X11 kind of way, when you just provide information about the monitors to the applications, and they can do weird color stuff to make it look correctly on the screen. That was done in a second in an external daemon that then poked around in the hardware properties to change how the color works. All of that has been moved into the compositor as a preparation for the future, which I'll get into a bit later, to make the whole compositor aware of all the color properties of monitors and their abilities, and different calibration profiles that you may have, and stuff like that. That's part of it.
Yeah, and about around last year, we also improved the latency of input, as in, the Wayland compositor has a role in sending the events to the clients so they can handle the input and whatnot. And GNOME Shell tried to reduce that work and try to send just one set of events per frame. But of course, there's gaming mice and there's gamers who go angry if they miss a little bit of latency. So we now have a infrastructure to send events directly to the clients with a much lower latency, as in not waiting for the next frame and sending all input, as in, for example, 1,000 Earth mice and whatnot. We would send the 1,000 events per second to the client right away. And yeah, there is also support for these new mice, as in actual mice, not touchpads, nor anything, which have a higher resolution wheel. These wheels typically will click, and you could move a fixed part of that. But these high resolution scroll wheels, they have a set of small steps in between clicks. So you have a finer degree of amount of distance you want to move forward. So there is now support for these new mices, and and about calming the input routing chaos. This deserves a little bit of history because maybe you don't know that GNOME Shell and Matter, they started as an X11 window manager, like back in the 2000s. It was called Metacity. It then turned into a compositor, an X11 compositor. We then added a GL toolkit, which is cluttered in order to render GNOME Shell using GL and whatnot. And then we made it a Wayland compositor. On each of those steps, there were different details of input that needed to be handled, and it was added in a quite organic way. And right now, there has been quite some work during the last year and in the upcoming months to actually put all of that together and make a GNOME Shell an actual more toolkit-like thing that you have events that propagate and come back and whatnot. And hold gestures, this is also, it's not the typical gesture that people get to do, but this is something that kind of helps in other gestures. Like, for example, when you scroll and we animate the scrolling, you can put the finger again on the touchpad and then we can stop scrolling and whatnot. So it could also be used for actual input, as in popping up a menu. I think macOS does that actually, popping up a menu when you just put the finger and top, no need to click and whatnot. But we don't use it that way yet. And I think this is
back to me. Bit wrong indentation, so bear with me. This is the things that we are working on that will hopefully we'll get a decent amount of progress in the short to medium term. As a continuation of moving all the color management to this from this external daemon to this inside the compositor to make it all aware and have all control of all the hooks that is related to that. We're working on re-engineering the way that we are drawing so that we can make use of all of these color information in every step of the drawing. So a difference from in the past, with Wayland, color management will be a bit more involved in the compositor compared to in the past, where clients tell the compositor about the information about their colors, and the monitor provides its information about how it presents its colors, and then the compositor will do a bunch of math and stuff to make it all look correct. So we're reworking and designing how we draw stuff to make all of this possible. HDR is also a bit tied into all of this. It adds another level of complexity. It adds HDR is a high dynamic range. This means that you can draw darker and brighter at the same time compared to just standard dynamic range when you can't have as dark as bright at the same time. That causes a lot of problems in a desktop environment compared to, for example, a TV, when you have to mix old style standard range content with high dynamic range content, and you have to transform the standard range and mix without breaking the HDR content. And that involves a lot of rendering changes that we have to do. So that's something we're focusing on right now. And performance, that is not part of color management, but indentation is wrong. We're doing some stuff here. One is introducing a real-time kernel mode setting thread that intends to utilize the real-time schedule in the kernel to post updates to the kernel about monitor updates so that we are always aware of what we're pushing and whether the thing we're pushing is ready, and doing it right in time before the monitor updates. Tied to this is something that there's no good name for it, but I would say maybe explicit buffer readiness. Some backstory to this. In OpenGL on Linux, when you render using OpenGL, the application creates a pipeline that is then pushed to the renderer, the GPU, and then before it's ready, the compositor gets told about the buffer, and then it's used in the compositor's pipeline to draw, and then the compositor pushes it away to the kernel, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's ready to be presented on the screen. So one thing we're adding is making sure that all the buffers that we are pushing to the monitor or pushing to the compositor are ready before we do it, which means that we won't get any surprises when we push them to the next level. Does that make sense? Together with a real-time mode setting scheduler thing, it means we can time the things we push to the screen by making sure that it's all ready and ready for the screen to sample. Another thing that Daniel is working on is to avoid the GPU and the CPU waiting for each other by when you draw and it's not ready for scanning out by the monitor. We might, in the past or in the current state, we'll push it away, but we will miss a whole cycle, and the CPU will wait for all the GPU to do its job, and then it will have to wait for another cycle, and then we will have missed a frame. But the thing Daniel is working on is not waiting for the whole another cycle to do the next frame. So it means that the CPU will not be waiting for the GPU to do all its work asynchronously.
And these are my items.
Yeah.
Yeah. So paint nodes, this is work from Borges, right? Yeah, so traditionally, we've been rendering stuff in the more intuitive way, as in, the GNOME shell is a complex UI made of many actors and whatnot, so we would iterate across that tree of actors and tell them to paint themselves and whatnot, and that is the intuitively correct way, but that doesn't really work well with GPUs. So we are trying to push into paint nodes, which are more stateful, details about how things are rendered. So this we would have a tree of paint nodes, which are more they are more friendly to the GPU because we already have the work pile, so we can actually put that together in the pipeline and push that to the GPU, and it is fairly friendlier than just rendering things out of the blue without the GPU knowing that you want to do that. And more culling, we currently, culling is a technique, so you avoid pointless GPU work, as in, for example, not rendering things that are occluded by other windows or other things. But we have that at the window level currently, so we do that well for Windows, but we want more integration with the toolkit and everything. We want everything to be like an actor and not having any special role in that. So we are trying to push that lower into the toolkit so it is usable by everything. And input throttling, I've been talking about that a bit before, but gestures, there's been some work also going on there. The thing is that we already had gestures in Clutter, gestures and actions, which are high-level objects that handle pieces of input for you. And well, Clutter was actually quite a pioneer into that model of handling input, but yeah, it was kind of simplistic in the way it was made. As in, well, it didn't cater for a complex UI with thousands of actors like a GNOME shell maybe. So there is work to improve that and to make these gestures actually friendlier to a tree of actors and complex pieces of UI handling, of input handling, where you have multiple actors stacked together that want to have different things to do with the input. And yeah, there is ongoing work to improve that. And now.
Hello. So we're moving up a level to GNOME Shell, which are the visible bits, the user visible bits of the GNOME desktop. So you're probably familiar with this already because it is a feature that landed in GNOME 42, which was released in spring this year. We got a new built-in screenshot/screencast UI built into the compositor, like built into GNOME Shell, available at like a single key press instead of hiding behind, I think it was 6 or 7 different key bindings. We got quick settings, which is a revamp of the top left user menu or status menu. Instead of a whole bunch of nested menus, it's now a set of toggle buttons. Some of them can have menus, which then the goal is to have like the most important settings available more conveniently, more touch-friendly. And in general, it removes one level of redirection because before that, all these actual settings were put away in submenus. The on-screen keyboard got some updates. It has been possible to get word suggestions for a long time for users of input methods, which are usually Asian languages like Chinese, Korean, or Japanese. And now it's also possible for users of like regular keyboards layout, which don't use an input method, but just your XKB layouts. And the keyboard now handles the terminal input hint, which means it makes like additional keys available, like the arrow keys or Control and Alt modifiers. The app grid, which is at the second level of the overview, where you can have all the installed apps available and can switch between the got some improvements as well. So there was some user testing done on the navigation because it was always possible to scroll or to swipe between pages, but it turned out that a lot of users weren't aware of that and were only seeing one page of apps. So there are like now always visible navigation errors. And it's now also possible to create a new page at the end by dragging beyond the last page. That was what is in released stable versions. Now some mentions of future plans. There will be some follow-up to the quick settings that landed on GNOME 43. Some of those will most certainly land in the next version, like menus for the Bluetooth toggle, some layout changes. Some plans will probably require more work and land later, like making the selection of available quick toggles user configurable, where we still have to figure out where we would to put like the configuration, if it's in settings or like some built-in editor in GNOME Shell itself. Another thing that has been on my list for like a long time is some revamp of notifications, mainly grouping, but also we are talking about the notification listing when you get to the calendar, not the banners you see in the sessions. Grouping would like group together different notifications of the same app, allow to expand them, and then also make available the notification actions inside the calendar pop-up. The next bit on the list is a pure technical change. We still have parts in Matter and GNOME Shell that use GTK3. And we want to move away from that. It won't be possible to move those parts to GTK4, so we will replace that otherwise. But it means we aren't going to be stuck forever on like a GTK version that is now in maintenance mode and will become legacy in the future. And the last bit is something that is probably more long-term, but there are now design discussions around several aspects of search, both on a technical level to not spawn one process per application that integrates with GNOME Shell Search, but to allow like a centralized search provider to provide results for different applications at once, but also in the layout. This is like on the discussion level. It will happen eventually, but well, we will see.
So I wanted to shortly highlight some work done by Jonas and Tobias Bernard on on phones, mobile, the mobile shell we call it. Most of it, let's just have a short look. What you see there is, for example, 2D gestures, like gestures not just going in one direction, but you can like switch like in between. And just lots of cool work happened over the last like year or so, and much of that hasn't landed yet, but we hope to get that into 43. I have a device here. If you want to play with it after the talk, I'll be here. Come over. It's really cool. We hope to, just get that going. And that's actually it.
So let's go back a bit on the Ubuntu side. We are, so during the LTS cycle, we stick with the previous release because it didn't really want to switch to GTK4 apps where we're too early for LTS and the 5-year cycle support. So basically, we're keeping there and for Gemini, but as soon as Kinetic started, we basically started to port to put all the 42 application versions with GTK4. So basically, most of the work, and now like we are on par with GNOME 43, and most of the work here has been done by Jeremy, which is gonna explain later better. And then all the GTK4 changes involved some porting our customizations, like for example the Ubuntu desktop panel we have in the GNOME Control Center, and as you can see our accent color, which is preserved through layback data. We're trying to get that as an upstream thing. It's like there are still lots of decisions regarding how to manage all these platform colors and palette and everything. It's basically a free desktop thing, which is taking some time, but we want to preserve our, at least orange. And but also you can have it green. So this is like basically the other accent color we support now. Basically, this is tiny patch we do on top of the official settings application. I think basically a row of colors you can pick, and we apply using in this case the free desktop settings. Well, yeah.
Does that work with Flatpaks?
No. Yeah, the fact is that in my work with Flatpaks, which are built with a patch version of libadwaite.
So what I wanted to know is, do you patch the Flatpak runtime?
And no, I mean, I wasn't seeing like a future for that. So also it's basically like something which is so far was like based on Yarrow thing. Like we're trying to apply the only in the Yarrow case. So if you're using like some other custom themes, this doesn't show up. Like if you're using the Ubuntu GNOME session, that's not happening. So it's only happening in the Ubuntu session. And it's an interim solution while we hope to have the accent color property for everybody else. And then in the shell side, we did lots of maintenance work and extensions are being mostly written for many aspects. But one thing we added back is that this is not what you expect. So it's not the main activity view, but actually what used to be the spread in Ubuntu Unity. So the selection of when you have multiple windows of a single application open, instead of basically clicking on the launcher, you open the overview with those windows and you select from that. So we're using the activity view but in a different way, only for window selection. And yes, this was something which we had in Unity and we wanted back, and finally we have it through the extension, the doc extension, which is also upstream work, so it's going to be possible to anybody who wants the doc anyways, without any Ubuntu patch. Then yeah, let's go.
Hi, excuse me. I'm Jeremy Bícha, and I'm on the Canonical desktop team. My job is to get all of the latest GNOME features and bug fixes to everybody using Ubuntu. I also am a Debian developer, and I push a lot of that work into Debian also. We maintain over 300 packages jointly with the Debian GNOME team on their version of GitLab called Salsa. 84% of those packages are in sync now. For more on this topic, I gave a presentation that was recorded at DebConf, the Debian conference in Kosovo in July, with more details about what we push, the history of this, and why there's still things that don't go all the way into Debian. GNOME 43 has arrived in Debian testing, and Ubuntu 22.10 weeks before it landed in Arch Linux, which surprises a lot of people that maybe misunderstand how the distributions are working. Next year in the spring, GNOME 44 will land in Ubuntu 23.04. Debian 12 is preparing for release, and so they won't see GNOME 44 for a few months later, because Debian 12 will be featuring GNOME 43, which includes all of the features that have landed so far that have already been discussed.
Hi, I'm Felipe. So these are updates on the GNOME Foundation, so more community-oriented updates. The GNOME Foundation is a non-profit organization that supports the GNOME community and in various activities. So this year, GNOME celebrated 25 years. So we made a custom website, happybirthdaygnome.org, visit. It has a beautiful timeline about the major milestones in our community history, so it's pretty cool. And we also had a very cool mariachi party in Mexico, in Guadalajara, in our last conference. It was amazing. The recordings of the conference are also available on YouTube. Another update in our community is that new McGovern has left the GNOME Foundation, so now we are looking for a new executive director. So we are specifically looking for somebody with non-profit experience, fundraising experience, to try to bridge outside of our bubble of tech. We also are hosting GNOME Asia in Kuala Lumpur next year, in December, the first week of December. It will be virtual as well and physical, so if you are not able to make it to Malaysia, you also can follow it online. During the pandemic, we did a bunch of regional events, GNOME on Board Africa and GNOME LATAM, and from now on, we are looking into making those physically. So for 2023, observe like news.gnome.org on our social media accounts as well for announcements of a GNOME event in your region. Lastly, we also are going to be in FOSDEM in February, and our GNOME conference next year is happening in Latvia, in Riga. Free attendance, so everybody who is interested can go to guadec.org and look that up. The GNOME Foundation has also sponsored some work on FlatHub payments. So we actually had a contract with CodeThink and a bunch of other freelance individuals to implement payment. We are very interested in improving the story of providing a way for developers to monetize their work, for new community members to actually have a career in open source and be able to make a living out of it. So this is a very fundamental step towards that. I'm pretty happy about this. And we also move our chats mainly to Matrix. It's still being bridged to IRC for those who prefer IRC, but we are favoring Matrix. It's actually very beneficial with newcomers who are not experienced with IRC. There's a new generation of folks who haven't been exposed to IRC, and somehow the Matrix, it's a good place for us to be, especially because we also get to be close to other communities that are in Matrix because of the federation. Lastly, it's more like an advertisement that GNOME participates every single year in Google Summer of Code and Outreach. We actually fund from the GNOME Foundation donations the Outreach sponsorships. So we usually have from 4 to 6 internship positions available every year, twice per year for Outreach, and in Google Summer of Code, usually around 10 to 15. So if you're interested in starting a career in open source, we know that it's very hard to find a way to work while you need to pay the bills. So these are good program opportunities. A lot of members of our community are also interns on this project, and we think that it's a great way to start. So if you're interested in that, just also look into our social media accounts and find out how to participate. And yeah, that's lunchtime, I guess. Thank you very much.
We are a bit over time, but if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. I have one.
I was wondering about the Ubuntu changes have been spread, where that is implemented. Is that part of the docking?
Yeah, it's already like it's upstream in the doc projects. So we have always been trying to do upstream work also in the extensions, although we're now basically driving it because the old upstream is not really much involved. But so yeah, it's all there. It's just an option. You can select, choose whether you are previews or that way of selecting. So it's for everybody.
Got your question. You raised your hand first.
This is to Trevino. Can you talk a little bit about the fractional scaling?
Yeah.
One upstream and what's up with this?
What do you want to know? Like, no, status is basically we have to finish a few things. Like in a sense, one thing we wanted to do is to probably compute better, like the same defaults for fractional values, and I think basically to decide to remove it from an experimental option, which is I don't think can be considered anymore. So it's more about, deciding. And on the XML side, probably we can, drop it once. I mean, we keep it mostly for compatibility with users if might need it. It's not really like our selling point at this moment.
So just like piggybacking off of that, like I didn't hear much about accessibility. Is there any updates on improving accessibility for like visually impaired users?
There is not much as improvements, I think, but there is an initiative to refurbish how the interfaces work in GTK and whatnot. After that, hopefully GNOME Shell will be able to import that and start using something similar. I think.
Yeah, hit it first.
This is for Matthias. You mentioned GTK 5, which is obviously going to be required for things that are API breaks. I was kind of surprised to hear it mentioned. It was early in my mind anyway. Isn't there a risk moving to major versions even every couple of years might be too fast, given the apps that are not yet on GTK
Yeah, it's certainly it's a trade-off. In the past, I feel, gotten stuck too long on a stable version like GTK2 lived forever, and then we had to like do a very heavy lift to like get GTK3 out the door, and we kind of had the ambition to like do more regular revisions, and we'll see how soon we get to GTK5. It's certainly not something that's going to happen within the next year, so we'll have to start making plans first. And so there's no need to be afraid of us like starting to like put out a major GTK version every year. That's not going to happen just for pure manpower reasons.
Thank you all for your great work. My question is about settings. Is it in the realm of possibility that you would accept a patch to just selectively disable panels based on decloud parameter?
This has been tried in the past. I think it was removed. I respect the original decision to remove that. What else can I say? Like me and Robert, we were working on a new process to have these kind of decisions to, like a better process to decide these things. So instead of like somebody's just simply coming to settings and throwing in a patch, and then we don't really know what to do with it, we're gonna have a better way to communicate these changes. Personally, I don't think like controllable panels, I don't think we're gonna make settings again back into a framework of a settings application. It is a settings application, not a framework at this point. But I don't know, who knows what the future holds. Question?
Yeah, back on the performance work for Mutter, you were talking about the real-time thread and about not missing a frame, and in general of reducing latency. Does any of that work also tie into supporting variable refresh rate, or is that something not yet on the agenda, or what's the status on that?
Variable refresh rate is also something being worked on actually that I forgot about. Add in the slides. Good point. How exactly it will tie into the prediction of deadlines and stuff like that is somewhat of an open question right now. What we do is query the kernel about the next cycle. So if we get a new API or if that already works for variable refresh rate, then it would work. Otherwise, we'd have to fall back to not being able to tell what the future of the buffer has to say.
Is there any more questions?
At what security level is the computer rendered useless?
Can you repeat the question?
No. At what security level? Because you said okay, level 2 is for big companies. Which security level is for the paranoid, or to say it in a different way, at what security level does my computer not work anymore?
I think that's a question for myself. I don't know how to answer that, to be honest.
If you want really secure, turn it off.
Yeah.
That's level 4, right?
Yeah, level 4 is burn your computer. You're not gonna have any other trouble with that. But really, I don't know at which level it becomes. Oh, I know that.
How many levels are there? Do we know?
3. There are 3. Well, assuming level 0 doesn't exist, which level 0 is like you're open to non-threads, security threads. So ignoring that, there's security 1, which is like good for desktop, security 2, which is like good for a security tightened company, and security 3 is like fantasy fiction. It's like
worth mentioning. There's a spec for this, right? There's like a document you can.
Yes, it's documented by the firmware updater thing, FWPT.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, FWPT, how to pronounce this, but it's documented in there. You can have a read. I think there's a link in the settings panel, but you're not to be able to access that because it's not enabled on Ubuntu. But you can access it on the web. Yeah, feel free to have a read at it. Have any more questions? I don't think so. Okay, fantastic. Enjoy your lunch.